Dear viewers, have you ever wondered what the limit of patience is? I was once a wife, a woman who believed that love could solve everything and that patience would bring peace, but I was wrong. On that fateful night, amidst blaring music and blinding lights, the man I loved with all my heart personally tore away the veil of lies and pushed me into the abyss of humiliation. And it was on that same dark night that I found my own light. The deafening music echoing through the luxurious mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, felt like 1,000 needles piercing my eardrums. But that was nothing compared to the pain tearing my heart apart. I stood alone in the middle of the ostentatious living room where the 3rd anniversary party of my husband's company, Jason Sterling, was being held. Around me, men in designer suits, glasses of whiskey in hand, mingled with women in dazzling dresses, the smoke of expensive cigars hanging in the air. The jewelry on display was worth more than a house. They were my husband's business partners and high society friends. In my simple jade-colored silk dress, I looked like a stranger, a dull ornament in my own home. I clenched my cold hands, trying not to tremble. Jason was with his closest friends, Mark and Ben. The 3 of them, their faces flushed with alcohol, were laughing and shouting. They were a group I could never fit into. To me, they weren't successful entrepreneurs, but a pack of wolves stalking weak prey. Their lewd gazes, scanning me from top to bottom, had always disgusted me. "Come on, a toast to our president, Jason. The business he built in 3 years is now an unstoppable force," exclaimed Mark. A man with a burgeoning beer belly and small eyes raised his glass. Jason smiled arrogantly. He downed his drink in one gulp and then glanced over at me. It was a cold look, without a shred of love, only possession and command. "We have to say that today's success is largely due to my wife, right?" His friends let out a knowing, contemptuous laugh. "Well, she gets credit for keeping the house nice," Ben interjected. Dear viewers, have you ever wondered what the limit of patience is? I was once a wife, a woman who believed that love could solve everything and that patience would bring peace, but I was wrong. My heart stopped. I knew they were plotting something. It wasn't the first time. I lowered my head, pretending not to hear, hoping Jason would refuse. But I was too naive. A few too many drinks, and my husband seemed to transform into another person. He enjoyed his friend's sick proposals. He loved the feeling of absolute power over others, especially his own wife. He stumbled toward me, grabbed my hand tightly, and dragged me to the center of the room, attracting everyone's stares. "All right, I'm in the mood today. I'm going to give you a good show," he whispered in my ear with a voice cold as ice. "Honey, do you love me?" I trembled, unable to look him in the eyes. "Jason, you're drunk. Everyone is looking at us." "I asked if you love me," he growled, squeezing my wrist until it hurt. I responded with a barely audible yes. He let out a wild laugh. "Then prove it. Let's play a game. Just take off your clothes and dance for us. If you do, I'll sign that big contract for your father's company right now." My father was critically ill, and the small family business in the Midwest was on the verge of bankruptcy. Jason knew it. He knew it was my greatest weakness. He was using my family's survival as a bargaining chip for his vulgar entertainment. My body went rigid. My ears went deaf. I could no longer hear the music, only the laughter of his friends, and the sound of my heart shattering. Humiliation. This was absolute humiliation. I looked at my mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth Sterling, sitting on a nearby sofa. She had a satisfied smile on her lips, as if she were watching an amusing play. In recent years, she had never treated me like a daughter-in-law. "What? Can't do it?" Jason provoked me with a mocking voice. "Or was your love a farce too? Is your love worth less than a contract?" His words were like thousands of needles stabbing my pride. Tears were about to flow, but I swallowed them. Crying, begging, that would only give them more pleasure. I had already endured enough. For the last 5 years, I had lived like a shadow, silently enduring my mother-in-law's contempt and my husband's sick jokes. I thought my sacrifice would bring peace to our home, but it didn't. My kindness and weakness had only emboldened them. Tonight, he had pushed me to the limit. Suddenly, all the fear and resignation inside me disappeared, replaced by a strange calm. It was the serenity of someone who has nothing left to lose. Slowly, I raised my head and looked Jason directly in the eyes. My gaze was no longer fearful, but a frozen void. "Okay." My voice sounded strange. "I'll play that game." The entire room fell into a deathly silence. Even Jason seemed a little surprised by my easy consent. He probably expected me to cry and beg. The smile on his lips became even more triumphant. "That's how my wife talks." I stopped looking at him. I turned to the crowd, watching in silence. The men's eyes were fixed on me, full of greed and morbid desire. I took a deep breath. The thin, cream-colored trench coat I was wearing suddenly felt heavy. Slowly, very slowly, I raised both hands and grabbed the lapels of the coat. Every movement was calm and deliberate, without haste. The laughter had ceased completely, leaving only the sound of hauntingly sweet music. Everyone waited. They waited for my humiliation to be exposed. Calmly, I removed the outer garment. The coat slid smoothly off my shoulders and fell to the floor. And then everyone in that room, my husband, my mother-in-law, and their depraved friends froze. My husband's triumphant smile vanished, and the wine glass in Mark's hand fell to the floor, shattering. Mrs. Elizabeth, who was sitting on the sofa, also jumped up, her eyes wide and an expression of disbelief at what she was seeing. The entire room plunged into absolute silence, a silence more terrifying than a scream. The atmosphere had become thick and sticky, and the music, which a moment ago sounded sweet, now seemed gloomy and sad. My coat lay silently on the cold marble floor, like a piece of soul recently torn away. All eyes, previously greedy and lewd, were now fixed on me with undisguised horror. I remained standing in the center of the room, under the dazzling chandelier, but I didn't feel naked. On the contrary, I felt like I was wearing invisible armor. Beneath my thin silk dress, what I showed them was not my skin, but a piece of paper carefully pinned to my chest, a white, letter-sized sheet of paper. On it, a black and white image of a small life in formation with a clear conclusion. Pregnancy, 6 weeks, fetal heartbeat positive. I was pregnant. After 3 years of longing, of countless secret visits to the hospital, of enduring my mother-in-law's cruel words, calling me barren, finally, heaven had taken pity on me. I found out the news that very morning, just before this horrible party. I wanted to give Jason a surprise. I wanted to tell him the happy news in a romantic setting. But he, precisely he, had ruined everything. "You're pregnant," Jason's voice stammered. The arrogance and drunkenness had completely disappeared from his eyes, leaving only incredulous bewilderment. He stared at the ultrasound taped to my chest. Then he looked back at my face as if trying to confirm if this was real or a joke. I didn't answer. I just sketched a faint smile, a smile more bitter than tears. "Why, Jason? The game isn't over yet. Do you still want me to dance for your friends?" Every word I spoke was light as a feather, but like a giant hammer striking the silence of the room. His friends, Mark and Ben, now pale, lowered their heads, unable to look me in the eye. It seemed that even their sick jokes had a limit. They didn't dare joke with a woman carrying their friend's blood in her womb. But my mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth, was different. Her astonishment quickly turned into fury and malice. She jumped up and ran toward me with wild eyes. "Pregnant? Who are you pregnant by? Don't think you can fool our family with this trick. Who knows if this child is Jason's or some other man's?" Every word she spat was a dagger driving into my heart. Even in this moment, she insulted me and doubted my fidelity. Jason seemed to react upon hearing his mother's words. He didn't defend me or refute his mother's slander. Instead, doubt began to sprout in his eyes. "It's true. Why are you saying this now? Where have you been? And who have you been seeing?" He joined his mother in interrogating me like a criminal. It turned out that in their eyes I was not only useless, but also a promiscuous woman. The love and trust I had given him over the last few years were worth nothing. The pain inside me transformed into a cold anger. I had harbored a faint hope that this child would be the lifeline to save our marriage, to bring him to his senses, but no, it only served to reveal their true faces more clearly. I didn't cry or justify myself. I knew that at this moment any explanation was useless. Calmly, I peeled the ultrasound off my dress, folded it carefully, and put it in my purse. Then I bent down, picked up my coat, and put it back on with dignity. My actions surprised everyone. They probably expected a scene of weeping and begging. "I'm tired." "Enjoy your party," I said with a strangely serene voice. I turned toward the stairs, leaving behind a group of frozen people and a chaos of suspicion and shame. I walked up the marble steps, one by one. With each step, I remembered the days when I first set foot in this house. I remembered the old Jason, a poor architecture student, but full of ambition. We met in a bookstore cafe, where I worked part-time to pay for my studies. He had no money or status, but he had a sincere heart and blueprints full of dreams. He won my heart with bouquets of wildflowers he picked by the roadside, with afternoons where we shared a slice of pizza dreaming of a bright future. He said he loved my purity, my simplicity, and my determination. He said he would work hard to give me a happy life. I believed him. I loved him with the pure heart of a girl who didn't know the world. My family lived in the Midwest. My parents were farmers. When I introduced him, they opposed it. They feared I would suffer, but I disobeyed my parents and left everything for him. The day we got married, we had nothing, just empty hands and a love that seemed eternal. We rented a small attic apartment in Brooklyn and started our business. I spent all my savings and even sold the necklace my mother left me to help him set up his small architecture firm. The first few years were very hard. I handled the accounting and human resources and even found clients for him. At night, we both hunched over blueprints. It was hard, but we were very happy. And then his company started to have its first successes. We got a big project, and the money started coming in. We moved from the humble attic to an apartment on the Upper East Side, and then to this estate in Connecticut. Our lives changed, and he changed too. He was no longer the simple young man from before. He started worrying about his appearance and his social connections. He fell in with people like Mark and Ben, whom he used to despise. He came home later and later, always smelling of alcohol and women's perfume. His mother, Mrs. Elizabeth, also came to live with us after becoming a widow. She hated me from day one. She always thought I wasn't worthy of her son, that I was a farm girl who got lucky catching his attention. When Jason's company succeeded, her contempt became more explicit. She criticized everything from my way of dressing to my way of walking and the fact that I couldn't have children. Instead of protecting me, Jason always took her side. "Mom is lonely. You have to endure a little," he would say. My patience became a habit, and then resignation. I deluded myself thinking that as long as the family was at peace, all my sacrifices were worth it. I didn't realize that my silence was allowing evil to grow. I spent all my savings and even sold the necklace my mother left me to help him set up his small architecture firm. The first few years were very hard. I handled the accounting and human resources, and even found clients for him. At night, we both hunched over blueprints. It was hard, but we were very happy. I slammed the door to my room. The sharp sound resonated like a declaration of rupture. I wanted to isolate myself from that false and evil outside world. I let myself fall to the floor, leaning my back against the cold wooden door. My body shook uncontrollably, not from cold, but from extreme anger and pain. Everything had happened too fast and suddenly. Just a few hours ago, I was a wife anxiously waiting to give happy news to her husband. Now I was a woman humiliated, slandered, and doubted by the man she loved most. The child in my womb was supposed to be the fruit of love, the bond that united the family. But now in their eyes, it had become a thorn, a tool to continue blaming and tormenting me. I hugged my belly, where a small life grew every day. Tears flowed again, but this time they were not of weakness, but of hatred. "Baby, I'm sorry. Mom can't give you a good father or a complete family, but I will protect you with my life." It turned out that in their eyes I was not only useless, but also a promiscuous woman. The love and trust I had given him over the last few years were worth nothing. The pain inside me transformed into a cold anger. I had harbored a faint hope that this child would be the lifeline to save our marriage, to bring him to his senses, but no, it only served to reveal their true faces more clearly. Everything had happened too fast and suddenly. Just a few hours ago, I was a wife anxiously waiting to give happy news to her husband. Now I was a woman humiliated, slandered, and doubted by the man she loved most. The child in my womb was supposed to be the fruit of love, the bond that united the family. But now in their eyes, it had become a thorn, a tool to continue blaming and tormenting me. I hugged my belly, where a small life grew every day. Tears flowed again, but this time they were not of weakness, but of hatred. Baby, I'm sorry. Mom can't give you a good father or a complete family, but I will protect you with my life. And I remembered my birthday 6 months ago. For the first time in years, Jason invited me to dinner. I was so happy that I dressed with care. I hoped it would be a new beginning, a sign that he still cared about me. But upon arriving at the restaurant, I realized it was a social gathering with his friends. Throughout dinner, he only talked business and toasted with his partners, leaving me alone at a corner of the table. After the party, he was completely drunk. I had to help him get to the car by myself. On the way home, because I took a wrong turn, he got angry and insulted me gravely. He stopped the car in the middle of the George Washington Bridge, pushed me out, and drove off at full speed, leaving me alone in the cold night. I had to walk almost 3 miles before finding a taxi. When I got home, he was sleeping like the dead. The next morning, he didn't remember anything from the night before. He only complained about why I hadn't changed his clothes before putting him to bed. The fragments of those painful memories pierced my heart, reminding me of my own stupidity and blindness. Why could I endure for so long? Why did I keep clinging to a love that had died long ago? Perhaps because I was too alone. My parents were in the Midwest and not in good health. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't have many friends. I had dedicated all my time and heart to Jason and this family. I had isolated myself. I had locked myself in a golden cage, confusing that with happiness. But tonight the cage had broken. The bird inside hadn't died. It had regained its wings. A painful truth came to my mind. The night before, prior to the party, while I was getting ready in the room, I accidentally heard Jason talking on the phone with Mark. The door wasn't closed tight, so I only heard a few words, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Don't worry, tonight there will be a good show. My wife has become a bit rebellious lately. She needs to be put in her place. What show? Tell me about the usual. I'll teach her a lesson she'll remember for a lifetime in front of everyone. Let's see if after tonight she dares to lift her head. At that moment I didn't believe my ears. I consoled myself thinking I had misheard, that he couldn't be so cruel, but what happened at the party proved everything. The humiliation I suffered wasn't an impulsive act of a drunkard. It was premeditated. He did it on purpose to humiliate me and demonstrate his power. He wanted to turn me into a submissive dog, a being that only obeyed. His evil and cruelty exceeded human limits. Suddenly, light knocks on the door, and Jason's voice sounded from outside. It was no longer a drunken voice, but calculated. "Emily, open the door. We have to talk." I took a deep breath and wiped my tears in a hurry. The show wasn't over yet. I got up and opened the door. Jason entered, followed by Mrs. Elizabeth. Jason's face no longer showed anger, but exhaustion and false regret. Mrs. Elizabeth stood with her arms crossed, wearing an icy expression. He approached and tried to take my hand, but I took a step back. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Before, I was too drunk. I didn't know what I was saying or doing. Can you forgive me?" Mrs. Elizabeth cleared her throat and intervened. "He has already apologized. It's not a big deal. It's normal for a drunk man to say or do some exaggerated things. As a wife, you should understand your husband." I looked at the mother and son. One played the sinner, the other the judge. A perfect performance. I said nothing, just looked at them in silence. My silence disconcerted Jason a little. He came closer and said with a more pleading voice, "Emily, don't be angry. You're pregnant. It's not good for the baby. It's my fault." "It's all my fault. It won't happen again. I promise you." Promises? How cheap were his promises now? But I knew I had to keep acting. I slowly raised my head with eyes full of tears. "Do you really promise? Do you swear you will be good to our child and me? That you won't let me suffer any injustice again?" He raised his hand to the sky and swore. I looked deeply into his eyes, trying to find a glimmer of sincerity, but there was only falsehood. I knew they had humbled themselves not out of regret, but because of the child in my womb. They needed an heir. Mrs. Elizabeth needed a grandchild to continue the lineage, to consolidate her position in the family. Jason needed a child to tie me down, to continue controlling me. I nodded slightly with a weak voice. I'll believe you, but I need time. Seeing that my anger had dissipated, Jason let out a sigh of relief. Mrs. Elizabeth's expression also softened. That's how I like it. Rest soon, you have to take good care of my precious grandchild. She said that and turned to leave, but she didn't forget to throw a last barb. To be safe, tomorrow we will go to the hospital for another checkup. We can only trust our family's clinic. They had started acting. Even my unborn child had become a tool in their hands. This war was going to be much fiercer than I had imagined. The door closed, and a suffocating silence enveloped me. Mrs. Elizabeth's words echoed in my ears. We can only trust our family's clinic, the V Health Clinic, of which she was a major shareholder. I understood her intentions perfectly. She didn't trust me. She wanted to control everything, including my health and information about my child. A shiver ran down my spine. If I went there, all test results and information about the fetus would be in her hands. What could she do? She could distort the facts, stage another drama to harm me. I didn't even want to think about it. I was like a fish on a cutting board, and they were the ones holding the knife, ready to gut me at any moment. I couldn't sit waiting for death. I had to find a way out. But where to go? My parents' house? Impossible. Jason and his mother would surely go there to pressure my parents. I couldn't cause them more worry. In the midst of the confusion, a name came to my mind. My godmother, Carol. She was my late mother's best friend. After my mother passed away, she took care of me like her own daughter. Carol was an extraordinary woman, a titan of industry who had built a massive textile empire from the ground up right here in New York. Now she was retired, but her influence and contacts in the business world remained formidable. More importantly, she was extremely intelligent and insightful, capable of seeing through people. From the beginning, she didn't like Jason. That boy has cunning in his eyes. Be careful, she told me. But at that moment I was blind with love and didn't listen to her advice. Now she was the only person who could help me. I waited until near midnight, sure that Jason and his mother would be fast asleep, before silently opening the door and tiptoeing down the stairs. I didn't dare turn on the lights, so I guided myself by the dim light coming through the windows. I used the landline in the living room to call Carol. I didn't dare use my cell phone, fearing Jason had installed a tracking app. The phone rang a few times, and then I heard her sleepy but very familiar voice. Hello? Godmother? It's Emily. My voice was almost a trembling sob. Hearing my voice, Carol woke up immediately. Emily, what's wrong? Why are you calling at this hour? Has something happened? Godmother. I couldn't continue, just sobbing on the other end of the phone. Calm down, child, calm down. Take a deep breath and tell me what happened. Carol's voice was firm but had a reassuring power. I held back the sobs and told her everything briefly. From the humiliating party to the baby in my womb and Mrs. Elizabeth and her son's plans. I could feel a terrifying silence on the other end of the line as I spoke. When I finished my story, Carol didn't speak immediately. There was a long silence, then a sigh. And then, with a voice colder and more determined than ever, she said, I warned you, you didn't listen, but crying now won't solve anything. Listen to me well. First, under no circumstances go to that V Health Clinic. Tomorrow morning, say you have a threatened miscarriage and need to go to New York Presbyterian Hospital or Mount Sinai, where the best specialists are. I will prepare someone there to ensure all your information is protected. Second, she continued, you can't divorce now. If you divorce now, they'll kick you out empty-handed and take custody of the child. They'll use the excuse that you have no job or assets to take the baby from you. But I can't live with them another day, I said desperately. You have to. Carol's voice was like steel. And not just live, you have to perfectly play the role of a pitiful wife, a submissive daughter-in-law who has realized her mistake. You have to make them believe you've completely surrendered, that you cling to this child as your last lifeline. When they lower their guard, we'll have time to act." "Act how?" I asked, not fully understanding her intention. "Gather evidence, my child," she smiled cunningly. "Evidence of their deceit and dirty dealings. We aren't going to limit ourselves to divorcing. We will make them pay for everything they have done to you. That Jason guy's company couldn't have gotten where it is without some dirty laundry. I'll have my people investigate everything. And Mrs. Elizabeth, a woman so greedy and evil, surely isn't clean." Carol's words were like a strong electric current running through my body. The despair and fear inside me slowly dissipated, replaced by another feeling, anger and a thirst for revenge. She was right. I couldn't crumble. I couldn't allow my child to be born without a mother or live in such a family. After the call, I felt I was no longer alone. I had a second mother by my side, a powerful and ingenious advisor. I stealthily returned to my room and lay down next to the man sleeping soundly. I looked at his face, the face I once loved so much. Now, in my eyes, it was just the face of an enemy. "I will act out this play with you, but the one who writes the script and decides the ending will no longer be you." The next morning I woke up with a clear plan in my head. I was no longer the confused Emily of the night before. I was an actress, and my role was that of a weak, frightened, and completely dependent wife. I stayed in bed on purpose, frowning and hugging my belly. When Jason entered, I whispered in a weak voice, "Honey, my stomach hurts a lot." Jason ran toward me with a face full of worry, but I didn't know how much of that worry was sincere. "What's wrong? Where does it hurt? I'll take you to the hospital right now." "I don't know," I moaned. "I just feel a constant sharp pain. Maybe it's because of yesterday." I left the sentence unfinished on purpose, so he would draw his own conclusions and feel guilty. As expected, Jason's face changed color. He waved his hands hurriedly and said, No, don't think about that. I'll call Mom. She'll know what to do." He ran out. Shortly after, Mrs. Elizabeth entered. She still had an unpleasant expression, but there was also a hint of worry. She stared at me, and then put her hand on my forehead. "You don't have a fever. How does it hurt?" "My lower abdomen hurts intermittently," I said, forcing some tears. "I'm scared something will happen to our baby." Mrs. Elizabeth fell silent for a moment. I knew she was calculating. If something happened to this child, her plans would also be affected. Finally, she said, "All right. I'll tell Jason to take you to the V Health Clinic for a complete checkup." It was the moment, the decisive moment. I shook my head vigorously, still hugging my belly. "No, mother-in-law, I don't want to go to V Health. It's a general clinic. They aren't specialized in gynecology. My friends say that in the first trimester, especially up to 3 months, it's best to go to Mount Sinai. There are professors there, the best doctors. And the equipment is more modern. Why worry about cost for my grandson?" My words hit right on the nail of Mrs. Elizabeth's psychology. Her grandson. She could hate me, but she couldn't not worry about the grandson she had waited for day and night. Besides, Mount Sinai was a highly trusted hospital, so she had no reason to refuse. After hesitating a moment, she nodded reluctantly. "You're right. Okay, then let's go to Mount Sinai. Jason, take her right now and make sure she sees the most competent doctor." Jason responded, Yes, and hurried to help me up. I feigned weakness on purpose, leaning completely on him. During the car ride into New York City, I pretended to rest with my eyes closed, but in reality, I was sending a message to Carol to tell her everything was going according to plan. Upon arriving at Mount Sinai, a perfect setup awaited me. As soon as we got to the ER, a very experienced-looking doctor, Carol's contact, came out to meet us. She introduced herself as the department head and said she would examine me personally. Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth, who had come to watch, were completely reassured seeing her. They took me to a private consultation room. After the exam, the doctor said with a serious expression, "The patient shows signs of a slight threat of miscarriage, probably due to psychological stress. For safety, it would be best if she stayed admitted for a few days for observation. We will provide the best treatment and therapy to protect the pregnancy." Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth didn't hesitate anymore upon hearing that and hurried to handle the admission paperwork. I was moved to a private room, quiet and comfortable. Thus, the first step was a success. I had freed myself from their direct control and gained a safe space and precious time. During the following days, I played my role as a patient perfectly. I stayed in bed reading, listening to music, revealing absolutely nothing that I was plotting something. Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth came to visit me every day, bringing all kinds of soups and healthy meals. They were strangely kind to me. Jason wouldn't stop apologizing and making all kinds of promises. And Mrs. Elizabeth no longer criticized me, but urged me to take care of my health for the sake of her grandson. I just smiled silently and nodded. My submissive attitude made them lower their guard even more, believing I had completely given up. Meanwhile, on the outside, Carol and her network began to move. Every night after Jason left, Carol came to visit me secretly, not as a godmother, but as an old friend of my mother. She brought me the first information. "Jason," she whispered, "that boy's company looks prosperous on the outside, but inside it's empty. He's been operating at a loss for several years, surviving mainly thanks to big contracts he got with the reputation and contacts you provided him. He also has considerable bank debt. And Mrs. Elizabeth," she scoffed, "that woman is even worse. I've had her investigated, and it turns out she's a gambling addict, not in some back alley game, but on the stock market. She's lost a huge amount of money and is now being harassed by loan sharks to pay her debts. They've given her a month." Everything became clear. That's why they needed money so urgently. That's why they set their eyes on my father's company. That's why Mrs. Elizabeth wanted a grandson so badly. She needed an heir to tie Jason down, and she needed Jason to pay her debts. They weren't just evil people, they were cornered beasts willing to do anything to survive. "So what should I do now, godmother?" I asked with a worried voice. Carol patted my hand. Her eyes shone with cunning. "It's not time to rush yet. Let them think they are about to achieve their goal. You rest here quietly. Your job now is to stay absolutely safe. I'll handle everything outside. You have to catch the snake when it sticks its head into the trap itself." I looked at her with a feeling of absolute relief and trust. I knew a bigger trap was being prepared, a more terrible storm, and this time the person in the eye of the hurricane wouldn't be me. During the week I spent in the hospital, I recovered. The fetus also stabilized. I spent most of the time reading, studying management and finance. Jason and his mother's story had taught me a very expensive lesson. I shouldn't trust blindly, and more importantly, I shouldn't lack knowledge. I had to arm myself to protect myself and my future child. Carol came to visit me every afternoon without fail, updating me with the latest information. "I had a tracking device installed on Jason's car," she whispered one afternoon. "That boy not only has suspicious business dealings, but he also has a mistress." My heart skipped a beat. I no longer loved him, but the betrayal still hurt. "Who is it?" "His personal secretary, young, pretty, and very good at getting money out of him. Jason has bought her a luxury condo and an expensive car, all in her name. It turned out that while I endured suffering silently at home, he was having fun with another woman outside. Anger invaded me, but I suppressed it quickly. It wasn't time for jealousy. Every piece of information was a piece in this game. Do you have proof?" "Of course." Carol smiled. "We have videos of them entering and leaving hotels, bank records of Jason's secret transfers to her, everything, but we won't use it yet. You have to save your ace in the hole for the final move." I nodded, fully trusting her plan. Exactly 1 week later, the doctor informed me I was healthy enough to be discharged. Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth came to pick me up with happy faces. They thought I was completely recovered, prey ready to continue their game. While packing my things, I purposely left a small notebook under the pillow. It was a diary I had started writing in the hospital. In it, I wrote about my fears, my remorse for causing trouble for my husband and mother-in-law. I wrote that I had realized my mistake, and that from now on I would strive to be a good wife and a good daughter-in-law. I was sure the suspicious Mrs. Elizabeth wouldn't overlook it. Sure enough, that night, while I was in the bathroom, Mrs. Elizabeth sneaked into my room. Through the crack in the door, I saw her open my diary and read it with a satisfied smile on her lips. She believed she had completely tamed me. My performance had been half successful. During the following days, I lived like a completely different person. I no longer endured in silence, but was proactively submissive. I got up early to prepare a hearty breakfast for the whole family. I bought Mrs. Elizabeth the most expensive tonics, telling her to take care of her health. I even started asking about Jason's work, feigning interest in my husband's business, and giving him naive advice. My 180-degree change made Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth suspicious at first, but they soon believed I had changed for the baby, that I had become more considerate of the family. In particular, I started showing excessive interest in Jason's work. I often brought him lunch at the office. Of course, my goal wasn't to take care of my husband. I hadn't been to the company in a long time and couldn't help but be surprised. Jason's company had grown much larger. Employees came and went busily. Everything looked very professional, but I knew that behind that shiny facade, worms were devouring everything. I brought lunch, but my eyes were busy observing my surroundings. I befriended the employees, especially the accounting team. I used my docile and pitiful appearance to earn their sympathy. I complained that I was bored at home, that I felt useless knowing nothing about my husband's work. That was how I befriended Mrs. Morgan, the head of accounting. She was a middle-aged woman, strict-looking but with a very warm gaze. I sensed she didn't like Jason and his friends very much. I started a more elaborate plan: get close to Mrs. Morgan and win her heart. I often bought small gifts for her children and asked about her family. Little by little, Mrs. Morgan opened up to me too. One day at lunch, when we were alone in the break room, Mrs. Morgan sighed and said, "Mrs. Sterling, you have it hard too. You got stuck with a husband who only thinks of himself." I seized the opportunity, and my eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Morgan, I know, but as a wife, what can I do? I'm just worried about the company. Lately, Jason goes out a lot for business meetings and seems to spend a lot. I'm afraid his bad friends are leading him astray and hurting the company." Mrs. Morgan looked at me with compassion. After hesitating a moment, she said softly, "It's true. Many expenses seem strange to me too. Mr. Liddy expenses. Sterling lately requests large sums of money for representation expenses, but the receipts are very unclear. When I ask him, he tells me to let it go, not to ask so many questions." Here was the first clue. I knew I was heading in the right direction. I took Mrs. Morgan's hand and said with a pleading voice, "Mrs. Morgan, could you help me? I don't ask for much. I just want to know if the company is really okay. Could you let me see the books for a moment? I promise I won't tell anyone. I just want to protect my husband's effort and sweat." Mrs. Morgan looked at me with evident hesitation. She knew this was against the rules, but seeing my teary eyes and my increasingly bulging belly, the compassion in her won out. She nodded. "Okay, but only once, and it has to be an absolute secret." I almost cried with joy. I didn't know that Mrs. Morgan's decision that day would not only help me but in the future would save her. The first secret door of Jason Sterling's company had opened, and I knew that behind it lay a labyrinth of lies and crimes. The opportunity came on a Friday afternoon. Jason and most of the employees had left early to prepare for the weekend. I used the excuse of bringing dinner to Mrs. Morgan, who often stayed to work overtime. In the empty accounting office under a dim yellow light, Mrs. Morgan locked the door and turned on her computer. "You only have 30 minutes, she said with a still somewhat worried voice. "I'll keep watch outside." I nodded. My heart was beating fast. I sat in her chair. The hand holding the mouse trembled slightly. Before me unfolded the entire financial world of Jason Sterling's company, a world I had never allowed myself to enter. I didn't know much about accounting, but I wasn't stupid. Following remote instructions from a financial expert hired by Carol, I knew what to look for. I focused on the line items for representation expenses, marketing costs, and consulting fees. As Mrs. Morgan had said, the figures here were abnormally high. I opened an Excel file called VIP Partners. Inside was a list of companies, supposedly strategic partners, signing regular consulting and marketing contracts worth hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars. I quickly took screenshots of the list. One name caught my attention: Golden Media LLC. This name appeared very frequently, with large contracts almost every month. I secretly sent this list of companies to Carol's people via phone for verification. While waiting, I kept searching. I opened the scanned contract files. Jason's signature was everywhere, bold and self-assured. But when I opened a contract with Golden Media, I paused at the section for the representative of Party B. A very familiar name, Daniel Evans. A complex light shone in Mrs. Elizabeth's eyes, a mixture of pride and a little bitterness. "It's Jason's aunt, my younger sister." She sighed. She had a hard life. She was pretty and smart, but she had bad luck. She married a violent man and a gambler and couldn't stand it, so she ran away with her son more than 10 years ago. We haven't heard from her. Now everything was clear. It wasn't individual corruption, it was organized crime. They had turned Jason's company into a washing machine, a tool to divert and split the money. I quickly copied all the contract files and suspicious spreadsheets to a small USB drive I had brought. The 30 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. Mrs. Morgan knocked on the door, signaling that time was up. I hurried to close all windows, delete the access history, and leave everything as it was. I thanked Mrs. Morgan repeatedly and put a thick envelope in her hand. "Buy something for the kids." "Thank you very much." Mrs. Morgan tried to refuse, but I insisted. "If you don't accept it, I won't be at peace. Consider it a small gift." Leaving Jason's company, I clutched the USB in my pocket. I felt like I was holding a ticking time bomb. When this bomb exploded, it would blow everything sky high. But I knew these proofs weren't enough. They could prove Jason had done fraudulent business, but they weren't enough to sink him completely in court, especially in a custody battle. I needed something stronger, a fatal blow. And I never imagined the next clue would come directly from my mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth. After obtaining evidence of Jason's commercial and legal activities, I continued playing my role, but the internal hatred and contempt made it increasingly difficult to sketch a fake smile. I was starting to feel exhausted. Fortunately, Mrs. Elizabeth, in her excitement over the money she would soon have to pay her debts, unwittingly handed me an even sharper knife. One afternoon when we were alone at home, Mrs. Elizabeth was strangely kind. She made me sit on the sofa and took out an old photo album. "Emily, come look at this." She turned the pages proudly, showing photos of Jason's childhood. "Look how handsome our Jason was as a child. When he grew up, how many daughters of rich families chased him, but he rejected them all and chose you." I forced a smile. I knew she was trying to win my favor, to create an image of a happy family to manipulate me more easily. Later, when she reached the last page, she stopped at a slightly faded photo. In the photo was a young and beautiful woman, looking very much like Mrs. Elizabeth. One name caught my attention: Golden Media LLC. This name appeared very frequently, with large contracts almost every month. I secretly sent this list of companies to Carol's people via phone for verification. While waiting, I kept searching. I opened the scanned contract files. Jason's signature was everywhere, bold and self-assured. But when I opened a contract with Golden Media, I paused at the section for the representative of Party B. A very familiar name, Daniel Evans. One name caught my attention: Golden Media LLC. This name appeared very frequently, with large contracts almost every month. I secretly sent this list of companies to Carol's people via phone for verification. While waiting, I kept searching. I opened the scanned contract files. Jason's signature was everywhere, bold and self-assured. But when I opened a contract with Golden Media, I paused at the section for the representative of Party B. A very familiar name, Daniel Evans. It was a sad story, but there was something in Mrs. Elizabeth's look that wasn't so simple. I asked nonchalantly, "And what happened to your aunt's husband?" "Ben, that depraved friend of Jason's." So that was it. They were in cahoots. This company, Golden Media, was clearly a shell company created to siphon money from Jason's company. Just then, my phone vibrated softly. It was a message from Carol. "Golden Media, AP Consultants, Planning MG, they are all shell companies." The representatives are all relatives or close associates of Jason and his friends. And the aunt's son? He must be grown up by now, mother-in-law. When I asked about the son, Mrs. Elizabeth's expression changed suddenly. She got a little nervous and closed the album hurriedly. That I don't know. We lost contact. She changed the subject. Well, why talk about old things? Do you feel like eating something special? I'll tell the maid to prepare it. And the aunt's son? Now everything was clear. It wasn't individual corruption, it was organized crime. They had turned Jason's company into a washing machine, a tool to divert and split the money. I quickly copied all the contract files and suspicious spreadsheets to a small USB drive I had brought. The 30 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. Mrs. Morgan knocked on the door, signaling that time was up. It was a sad story, but there was something in Mrs. Elizabeth's look that wasn't so simple. I asked nonchalantly, "And what happened to your aunt's husband?" Just a few days later, Carol called me. Her voice didn't have its usual calm but was full of anger. "Emily, sit down and listen. What I'm going to tell you might shock you. He must be grown up by now, mother-in-law." When I asked about the son, Mrs. Elizabeth's expression changed suddenly. She got a little nervous and closed the album hurriedly. That I don't know. We lost contact. She changed the subject. Well, why talk about old things? Do you feel like eating something special? I'll tell the maid to prepare it. He must be grown up by now, mother-in-law. When I asked about the son, Mrs. Elizabeth's expression changed suddenly. She got a little nervous and closed the album hurriedly. That I don't know. We lost contact. She changed the subject. Well, why talk about old things? Do you feel like eating something special? I'll tell the maid to prepare it. It was a sad story, but there was something in Mrs. Elizabeth's look that wasn't so simple. I asked nonchalantly, "And what happened to your aunt's husband?" And the one who caused the accident was none other than her husband. But the case was strangely archived. The man only served a few years for involuntary manslaughter. According to a source, Mrs. Elizabeth arranged everything. My mind was chaos. Why would Mrs. Elizabeth hide the truth about her sister's death? Why help the man who killed her sister? And the child? Where is he now? Mrs. Elizabeth's sister, Carol's voice hardened. She didn't run away because of her husband's violence. She died in a traffic accident 15 years ago. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A terrible conspiracy, an atrocious crime, was slowly being revealed. The mother-in-law I had lived with for the last few years, Mrs. Elizabeth, was not just a greedy and evil woman, but could be a murderer, a demon in human skin. She killed her sister and got rid of her nephew. For what? For money? For her sister's inheritance? That question haunted my head, a question only she could answer. The truth about Mrs. Elizabeth's past exploded in my mind like a bomb, leaving only desolation and extreme fear. It gave me chills to see that woman coming and going from this house every day, still smiling, talking, and lecturing me. Beneath the noble facade of a wealthy lady was a devilish soul and blood-stained hands. I kept my composure and continued playing my role, but every time I faced her, I had to fight not to reveal the hatred in my eyes. I knew I was walking on a very thin rope. If she realized I knew her secret, I didn't know what madness she might commit. Mrs. Elizabeth's sister, Carol's voice hardened. She didn't run away because of her husband's violence. She died in a traffic accident 15 years ago. One morning, Mrs. Elizabeth received a call. She was in the living room, but seemed to have forgotten my presence, sitting at the nearby dining table. "Hello, who is it?" Her voice was slightly irritated. Hearing something from the other side, I saw her face suddenly turn pale. "What are you saying? How did you get my number?" She got up hurriedly and went to a corner of the balcony. Her voice was reduced to a whisper, but the panic in it was unmistakable. "I don't know what you're talking about. That matter ended a long time ago. What do you want?" I pretended not to see, but I pricked up my ears to the max. I vaguely heard words like money, shut up, life. When the call ended, Mrs. Elizabeth entered the house with a distorted face, her hands and feet trembling. She slumped into a chair and muttered to herself, "Why? Why does he appear now?" Throughout the day she was restless, as if she had lost her mind. That night she called Jason to his private office and closed the door tightly. I didn't hear what they were saying, but when Jason came out, his face was just as tense. He went straight to the bar, poured himself a glass of strong liquor, and drank it in one gulp. I knew something serious had happened, something related to Mrs. Elizabeth's old secret. Someone from the past had come back to blackmail her. I immediately informed Carol. Carol moved very fast. She ordered surveillance on all of Mrs. Elizabeth's movements, and just 2 days later, Carol called me. "Emily, that woman is going to move. She just withdrew a large sum of money, $500,000 in cash. Tonight at 9 she will meet a man in an old cafe garden in a secluded park in Queens. This is our chance." My heart was beating fast. What should I do? "I've already installed cameras and microphones there, but I need you to see it from a safe place. There are things you can only believe if you see them with your own eyes." Her voice was reduced to a whisper, but the panic in it was unmistakable. "I don't know what you're talking about. That matter ended a long time ago. What do you want?" "You arrived on time," the man said with a hoarse voice. "That night I lied to Jason, telling him I had a headache and wanted to go to bed early. After confirming he had gone out with his friends, I sneaked out of the house. Carol's car was already waiting. They took me near the agreed cafe. Carol's people were scattered everywhere, disguised as customers. They took me to another hidden car, but from which I could see the whole situation clearly through a small screen connected to the hidden cameras. The money. Take it and get out. Disappear from my sight," said Mrs. Elizabeth, trembling, pushing a bag toward him, "and don't ever appear before me again." The man laughed, a creepy laugh. "Disappear. Mrs. Elizabeth, do you think everything is so simple? These $500,000 are just the interest for my 15 years of silence. You owe me a lot. You are shameless. Our agreement wasn't this." Exactly at 9, Mrs. Elizabeth arrived. She was dressed in black, with a hat and sunglasses, moving stealthily like a criminal. She chose a table in the darkest corner. A few minutes later, a man of about 60 approached, thin and gaunt. His face was furrowed by the wrinkles of a hard life, and a long scar crossed his cheek. I froze. So, this man was the late aunt's husband, the father of the missing child, and he wasn't the culprit of the accident. The mastermind was Mrs. Elizabeth. "I don't know where he is," stammered Mrs. Elizabeth, trembling with fear. "He was adopted by someone else." "Don't lie!" The man slammed the table. "I've investigated everything. You handed him over to a sterile couple near the border and cut all contact. You sold your own nephew, demon." Tears began to roll down the man's eyes. "I lost my wife. Now I've also lost my son. All because of you. Today I don't need the money. You're going to pay. I'm going to go to the police. I'll tell the whole truth." Having said that, he jumped up to leave. Mrs. Elizabeth, in a state of extreme panic, grabbed his hand and begged him. "No, please, I'll give you more money, whatever you want, but please, keep your mouth shut." But the man wasn't listening anymore. In her desperation, Mrs. Elizabeth did something insane. She took a small but sharp knife out of her purse. "If you want to die, I'll grant your wish," she screamed, lunging at the man. Everything happened in an instant, but at that very moment, the customers around stood up in unison. They were the police officers Carol had notified in advance. Before Mrs. Elizabeth's knife could touch the man's body, she was stopped by a firm arm. "Elizabeth Sterling, you are under arrest for attempted murder and aiding and abetting a criminal." The show was over. Mrs. Elizabeth's last crime was exposed to the light of day. The image of Mrs. Elizabeth screaming like a madwoman while being handcuffed in the cafe was recorded in its entirety. This video, along with the testimony of her former brother-in-law, Arthur Ross, and all the evidence we had collected, formed an irrefutable criminal file. The case was reopened, and the terrible truth that had been buried for 15 years finally came to light. Mrs. Elizabeth was not only the mastermind behind the traffic accident that caused her sister's death, but also the person who cruelly sold her own nephew. Her motive was none other than greed. She wanted to keep the entire inheritance her parents had left to the two sisters. She bought Arthur Ross's silence with money and the promise to take care of his son, a promise she brutally broke. Mrs. Elizabeth's arrest shook the high society of New York. The news spread like wildfire. Jason, upon learning of his mother's arrest, collapsed completely. He ran to the precinct, but it was too late. The empire that mother and son had built on lies and crimes was beginning to crumble. This was the moment I had been waiting for. While Jason was plunged into chaos, I launched my coup de grace. I presented all the evidence of embezzlement of funds from Jason's company, the creation of phantom contracts, and tax fraud to the Department of Economic Crimes and the FBI. At the same time, I filed for divorce in court, attaching all proof of his infidelity, the plot to humiliate me, and his complicity in covering up his mother's crimes. A true storm unleashed over Jason Sterling's head. He had to face two wars simultaneously. On one hand, a criminal investigation that could lead him to prison. On the other, a divorce lawsuit that could leave him in ruins. His best friends Mark and Ben, upon hearing of the case, cut all contact and disappeared. The shell companies they had created were quickly discovered, and a network of organized fraud was uncovered. Jason was left completely alone. He ran from one place to another, looking for the contacts he was once so proud of, but no one dared to lend him a hand. No one wanted to be involved with a family of disgraced criminals. In his desperation, he came to find me again. This time there was no longer arrogance or falsehood. He knelt before me in the same mansion he once considered his. He cried and begged for forgiveness. "Emily, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Please, forgive me just this once. Withdraw the complaint. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave that woman and come back to you and our baby. Save me just this once." I looked at the man kneeling at my feet, crying his eyes out. His elegant and sophisticated look had disappeared, leaving only a pathetic and miserable figure. But in my heart there was not a shred of compassion or forgiveness. I sketched a cold smile. Forgiveness? With what right do you pronounce those two words? When you and your depraved friends tried to strip me in the middle of the party, did you think about forgiveness? When you conspired with your mother to steal my family's assets, did you think about forgiveness? And when you knew perfectly well that your mother killed your aunt and got rid of your cousin, and still you kept silent and covered for her, did you think about forgiveness? Each of my questions was like a blade driving into his heart. He was left speechless. "You don't owe an apology just to me, Jason." My voice became firm. "You owe it to my father, to the child in my womb, to your aunt, and to your unfortunate cousin. It's a debt you won't be able to pay, even in a lifetime." I turned my back on him, not wanting to see his miserable face for another second. "Justice will take care of everything." Those were my last words to him. Days later, an arrest warrant was issued against Jason for investigation purposes. He was handcuffed and taken out of his own company before the gaze of hundreds of employees. At that moment I knew the game was truly over. I had won, but it was a bitter victory, achieved with too many tears and pain. After Jason's arrest, I received an unexpected visit. The woman who had come between our marriage, the secretary named Laura, came to find me at Carol's residence, where I was staying. Her belly was quite bulging. She didn't have the haughty and triumphant look I had seen in the photos. Her face was gaunt and her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't scream or insult me. She simply looked at me with a mixture of resentment and pleading. "Emily, please," her voice was hoarse, "save Jason. He's not a completely bad person like you think. He did everything for me and for this child." I looked at her and her belly. Complex feelings arose in me. I was also a woman and a future mother. I could understand her fear, but that compassion couldn't erase what she and Jason had done. "You say he did it for you and the child?" I asked calmly. "Did you know that the money with which he bought you the apartment and the car was embezzled money from the company? Did you know how many people he drove to bankruptcy to get big contracts? And did you know how cruel he was to the wife who started with him from scratch?" She lowered her head in silence. She knew, or at least suspected, but chose to close her eyes and enjoy a life of luxury built on lies and the suffering of others. "I can't help him," I said firmly. "He has to pay for what he has done. And as for you and the child, that was your choice. You chose that path, so now you have to face the consequences." I entered the house without giving her another chance to plead. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't a saint either. My forgiveness couldn't be for those who had been accomplices to evil. I only hoped the innocent child in her womb could have a better life in the future, unaffected by the sins of his parents. The last ray of hope was the news about Jason's missing cousin. With the police investigation and the help of social organizations, a large-scale search began, and a miracle occurred. They found the boy, now a 20-year-old young man, in a poor fishing town near Bar Harbor in Maine. He had been adopted by a childless fisherman couple and lived under the name Eric. His life had been hard and humble, but he had grown up healthy and become a good and simple young man. The day of the reunion was a sea of tears. Arthur Ross, released on bail pending trial, hugged the son he had found after so many years and cried like a child. They were tears of repentance and late happiness. I was there too. Seeing Eric, a young man with kind eyes and an innocent smile, my heart ached. He should have had a more prosperous and happy life. I decided to give him part of my assets as compensation. I would support him so he could study and have a better future. It was the only way I had to console the soul of Jason's late aunt. Weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from prison. The shaky and crooked handwriting was Jason's. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to bring up anything belonging to the past, but in the end, I opened it. I wanted to see what this man had to say at the end. To Emily, the final trial was held. On charges of organized fraud, embezzlement, defamation, and complicity in covering up a murder, Jason Sterling and his mother, Elizabeth Sterling, received the harshest sentences. Jason was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Mrs. Elizabeth, considering her advanced age and cooperative attitude, to 20 years in prison. Jason's friends, Mark and Ben, and others involved in money laundering, also had to pay the price of spending their youth behind bars. Carol smiled. I smiled too. My life, which had been a storm, had finally anchored in a quiet port. A new dawn was coming, not only for me but also for future generations. Goodbye, Jason. I folded the letter without shedding a single tear. His late confession meant nothing to me anymore. The love had died, only the void remained. He was right, he had lost. But I, the victor, didn't feel happy either. The final trial was held. On charges of organized fraud, embezzlement, defamation, and complicity in covering up a murder, Jason Sterling and his mother, Elizabeth Sterling, received the harshest sentences. Jason was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Mrs. Elizabeth, considering her advanced age and cooperative attitude, to 20 years in prison. Jason's friends, Mark and Ben, and others involved in money laundering, also had to pay the price of spending their youth behind bars. Arthur Ross, for his courage in denouncing Mrs. Elizabeth's crime and his contribution to finding his son, received the clemency of the law. He was sentenced to probation and reunited with his son. The day of the sentencing, I didn't go to court. I didn't want to see their faces again. I learned the news from the newspaper. When I read the words life sentence, my heart was strangely calm. All the resentment and hatred seemed to fade with that verdict. I had achieved justice, not only for myself but also for the other victims. That was enough. I sat in my new office looking at the busy urban landscape of New York City. I didn't go back to my old company. I sold it to completely break with the past. Instead, I used part of my assets and my knowledge to create an investment fund specialized in supporting small businesses led by women. I wanted to use my power to help other women so they wouldn't make the same mistakes as me. At that moment, Carol entered. She was carrying a cup of hot chamomile tea. "What's wrong, child? What are you thinking about?" I smiled and shook my head. "Nothing, godmother. I just felt that finally everything was truly over." "It's not the end." Carol put the cup on the table. "It's the beginning. A new beginning for you and the little angel who is about to be born." She gently caressed my belly with eyes full of affection. "Have you thought of a name for my granddaughter?" I looked out the window. The first rays of dawn shone brightly. "Yes," I said with a voice full of hope. "Her name will be Aria. I wish for her life to always be peaceful and free." Carol smiled. I smiled too. My life, which had been a storm, had finally anchored in a quiet port. A new dawn was coming, not only for me but also for future generations. It was the only way I had to console the soul of Jason's late aunt. The Phoenix Fund, which I named to commemorate my rising from the ashes, began to operate. I didn't get involved in daily management, but assumed the role of chairwoman of the board to set strategy. I left daily management in the hands of a team of professionals trusted by Carol. I wanted to dedicate all my time and heart to preparing for the most important role of my life, being a mother. When you read this, everything will be truly over. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I have no right. I just want to tell you one thing, something you might never believe. I truly loved you. When I met you in that bookstore cafe, I was truly fascinated by your purity and your strength. The years of entrepreneurship with you, hard but happy, were the most authentic days of my life. But money and fame blinded me. Carol smiled. I smiled too. My life, which had been a storm, had finally anchored in a quiet port. A new dawn was coming, not only for me but also for future generations. To Emily, when you read this, I will be very far away. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. After everything ended, I felt I no longer had the face to stay in the company and face you. Although I didn't hurt you directly, my silence and passivity regarding Jason Sterling's bad deeds are also a sin. I received too much money from you. I don't deserve it. With that money, I was able to send my daughter to study in the United States so she could fulfill her dream. With that, I think I have settled my debt to my daughter. I hesitated a lot to send you this notebook, but in the end, I decided to do it. It is a personal record I wrote while working for Jason Sterling. Inside there are probably secrets that not even the investigation has discovered yet. I don't know if this will be of any more help, but I think you have the right to know the whole truth. I wish you and your child are always well. Sincerely, Mrs. Morgan. I opened the notebook hurriedly. Page after page, Mrs. Morgan had meticulously recorded suspicious transactions, secret meetings and conspiracies she had discovered by chance. And on the last page, I read a passage that left me stunned. Date, X. Today, Mr. Sterling argued with Mrs. Elizabeth again. I heard it by accident. Mrs. Elizabeth threatened to reveal the truth about Mr. Sterling's father's death if he didn't give her money. Mr. Sterling Sr. didn't die of a heart attack. What other terrible secret can there be? My body went cold. Jason's father, Mr. Sterling Sr., I only knew had died almost 10 years ago, shortly after Mrs. Elizabeth and her son moved in with him, from a sudden heart attack. It was considered a natural death, and no one suspected. But this writing suggested a terrible possibility. Was his death really natural, or was it another covered-up crime? I closed the notebook. My hands and feet were shaking. I thought everything was over, but it seemed I had only peeled one layer of a rotten onion. How many more layers of crimes were hidden inside? Mrs. Morgan's notebook, like a ticking time bomb, shook my quiet life again. The secret of my ex-father-in-law's death haunted me. I spent several sleepless nights debating whether I should reopen this case. Part of me whispered that the past was the past, that the wicked had already been punished, and that I should live my new life, not get entangled anymore in complex and dangerous matters. But on the other hand, my conscience wouldn't allow it. If it was truly a murder, the soul of the deceased would not yet rest in peace. And the guilty, even if they were in prison, their crimes hadn't fully come to light. Finally, I decided to go to Carol. She was the only person I could trust and ask for advice. After examining the notebook and listening to my story, Carol fell into deep thought for a long while. Her face showed deep concern. "Emily, this isn't a simple matter," she said with a serious voice. "It happened 10 years ago. All evidence has likely disappeared. Besides, the main suspects, Jason and Mrs. Elizabeth, are both in prison. Reopening the case will be very difficult and could put you in danger. But if it's true, we can't act like we don't know." "Godmother," I said with a determined look, "a person's life can't be forgotten just like that." Carol looked at me and nodded silently. "Okay, my child. You've become quite the woman, not only strong but also with a compassionate heart. Fine. If you've made a decision, I'll help you until the end." She picked up the phone and called an old friend, a retired police commissioner who still enjoyed great prestige and contacts within the force. She explained the whole situation, highlighting the suspicious points in Mrs. Morgan's records. The commissioner, on the other end of the line, listened very attentively and promised to reopen the investigation secretly from the beginning. The investigation was carried out quietly. I tried not to get distracted, focusing on my pregnancy and managing the investment fund, but every day I waited for news anxiously. Almost a month later, the commissioner asked Carol and me to meet him personally. "We have found some breakthroughs," he said with a low, confident voice. "According to medical records, it is true that Mr. Sterling Sr., end of USED and end of USED 9, had a history of heart disease, but the strange thing is that on the night of his death, only Mrs. Elizabeth was at home. Jason was on a business trip at that time. Mrs. Elizabeth stated that he had a sudden heart attack and died before the ambulance arrived." "What is strange?" I asked impatiently. "We found the paramedic who attended that day again. According to his testimony, when he arrived at the scene, Mrs. Havendake, Elizabeth was very calm, without showing the panic of someone who just lost her husband, and he coincidentally saw a strange unlabeled pill bottle on the nightstand. When he tried to ask Mrs. Elizabeth hurriedly removed it. A strange pill bottle. My heart beat fast. A terrible crime that had been buried for 10 years finally came to light. A special trial was held. Mrs. Elizabeth went from being an inmate to being accused in a murder case. With her confession and irrefutable evidence, she received another verdict, a verdict consistent with her crime: life imprisonment. Sterling died before that date. The estate would be managed by a trust committee, and Mrs. Elizabeth wouldn't receive a cent. Everything fit like the pieces of a puzzle. The motive was too clear. Mrs. Elizabeth was by Mr. Sterling's side, but she had no legal status or assets. She feared being kicked out empty-handed. If Mr. Sterling died just before Jason turned 30, as Jason's sole guardian, she could control the entire fortune. "We suspect Mrs. Elizabeth murdered Mr. Sterling using some kind of poison that can induce symptoms similar to a heart attack," concluded the commissioner. "But to prove it, we need the final evidence. We need her own confession." Getting a confession from a sly fox like Mrs. Elizabeth wasn't easy, especially being in prison. She wouldn't admit anything. She would keep proclaiming her innocence and cursing me for ruining her family. But the police had their methods. They didn't use torture. Instead, they used psychological warfare. They showed her current photos of Jason suffering and desperate in prison. They told her that if she confessed frankly, they might consider a reduction in the sentence, and she would have the chance to see her son sooner. But the fatal blow was when they had Jason's cousin, Eric, meet with her. That good and simple young man knelt before the woman who had destroyed his entire family without a single word of reproach. He only asked her one question: "Aunt, why did you do that to my mother? What harm did my mother do to you?" That innocent and painful question was what completely tore down Mrs. Elizabeth's last barrier of defense. She looked at Eric. She saw the image of her unfortunate sister, and her own nephew whom she had cruelly abandoned. She rested her head on the table and began to sob. And between sobs, she confessed everything. She admitted she had put a poison bought on the black market in Mr. Sterling's tea. She sat quietly and watched him writhe in pain until his last breath. She staged the perfect drama of a sudden heart attack. A terrible crime that had been buried for 10 years finally came to light. A special trial was held. Mrs. Elizabeth went from being an inmate to being accused in a murder case. With her confession and irrefutable evidence, she received another verdict, a verdict consistent with her crime: life imprisonment. Jason, upon learning the truth about his father's death, collapsed completely. The mother he had respected so much, and for whom he had covered up all her crimes, was his own father's murderer. When his last faith crumbled, he went mad in prison. The day Mrs. Elizabeth was sentenced, I didn't go to court. I sat at home. I lit incense before the portrait of my parents. Beside it, I also placed photos of my late aunt and my unfortunate ex-father-in-law. I whispered, "It's all over. Rest in peace, all of you." The longest nightmare was finally over. Justice, though delayed, had finally been fully served. My heart felt calm and light. I had done the right thing, not only for myself, but also for the souls who had died unjustly. Time is indeed a mysterious force. It doesn't erase scars, but it covers them with a thin layer of oblivion. It wears down the sharp edges of pain and finally restores original justice to all things. After the last trial, when the media storm and the days of psychological warfare passed, my life slowly returned to the orbit of calm. But I knew that for those who had sown winds, the harvest of whirlwinds was just beginning. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but grind exceedingly fine. The net they wove themselves with greed and evil finally imprisoned them with no escape. Rejected by society and disowned by her family from her hometown due to the shame, she had to give birth alone in a public hospital. After the birth, she moved with her baby to a small attic in a poor neighborhood, where I was told she struggled every day with diapers, formula, and a precarious life. Her former glamour and haughtiness had disappeared completely, leaving only a gaunt woman burdened by the weight of survival. The four cold walls of the cell quickly stripped away his shiny shell, revealing a miserable loser. The first few months he remained defiant. He shouted, cursed, and claimed everything was my fault and his mother's conspiracy. He still believed that with the contacts and money he had left he could appeal and turn the tables, but when his appeal was dismissed, when the friends and partners who once praised him turned their backs on him one after another, and when no one except his public defender went to visit him, he began to realize that the game was truly over. He had completely lost. They say he started keeping silent. He spent hours staring at a spot on the cracked wall. He lost weight drastically, and his black hair, once shiny, turned gray. His eyes, once full of calculation, became deep and empty. At night he had nightmares and screamed names in his sleep. My name, that of his murdered aunt, and even that of his father, whom he never really got to know. The remorse of conscience he had tried to bury under the shell of success now surfaced, eating away at him every day, every hour. The last letter he sent me, with his words of late repentance, was probably one of his rare moments of lucidity, but even that lucidity was soon swallowed by the darkness of despair. He had destroyed everything with his own hands, his business, his family, his love, and himself. The rest of his life would be nothing but a long succession of days of regret and loneliness, a price too high, but the natural consequence of his sins. The fate of his accomplices was no better. Secretary Laura, Jason's mistress, who dreamed of becoming the lady of the house once I was eliminated, woke up abruptly from her fantasy. After Jason's arrest, the luxury condo, the expensive car, and everything he had bought with illegal funds were confiscated. With an increasingly bulging belly, she suddenly found herself with nothing. No company wanted to hire someone involved in such a huge economic scandal. Rejected by society and disowned by her family from her hometown due to the shame, she had to give birth alone in a public hospital. After the birth, she moved with her baby to a small attic in a poor neighborhood, where I was told she struggled every day with diapers, formula, and a precarious life. Her former glamour and haughtiness had disappeared completely, leaving only a gaunt woman burdened by the weight of survival. I don't know if she regretted her choices, but I think every time she looked at her innocent son, she couldn't help but remember the price of building happiness on the suffering of others. Jason's depraved friends, Mark and Ben, who gloated over my humiliation and participated in his dirty business, didn't escape their punishment either. When Jason's case broke, their names also appeared in all the newspapers. The shell companies they had created to launder money for Jason were quickly investigated. Although they didn't receive prison sentences as severe as Jason's, they also faced massive fines and sanctions sufficient to drive them into bankruptcy. But the hardest punishment for them came from the high society they took such pride in. They became pariahs. No partner wanted to do business with them, no friend wanted to see them. Wherever they went, they were pointed at. Ruin and loss of reputation, that was the price they had to pay. Once I saw Ben from afar. He no longer drove a sports car or wore designer suits. He was sitting alone in a dive bar with a gaunt face and unkempt beard, drinking wine desperately. The price of selling one's integrity for vulgar pleasures was the emptiness and meaninglessness of an aimless life. And finally, the source of all evil, Mrs. Elizabeth. For a woman of her age, a 20-year sentence was, in practice, a life sentence. But the punishment of the law seemed too light compared to what she had to endure in her final years. The shock of the revelation of her crimes, the imprisonment of her only son, and the loss of her entire fortune completely destroyed her already weakened body. In prison, she fell ill constantly. From being a lady attended by servants, she had to live in a harsh and miserable environment, but physical suffering was nothing compared to mental torment. The ghosts of her murdered sister, her sold nephew, and the husband she poisoned tormented her every night. They say she screamed and raved at night, calling for her sister, her nephew, only to then curse and cry. Late repentance turned her last years into a hell on earth. She died alone and miserable in the prison infirmary. The day of her death, no relative came to claim her body. Not even her son Jason, for whom she had sacrificed everything, could attend. She left forgotten like the very crimes she tried to bury. When I learned of her death, I felt not a shred of satisfaction, only a void and a sense of sadness. Greed turned a human being into a demon, and in the end, that same greed devoured her. It was a tragic, vicious circle, a costly lesson on karma. Amid the dark image of punishment, there was a ray of light. Jason's unfortunate cousin, Eric, after reuniting with his father, saw his life change completely. With the money I secretly provided and the help of sponsors, Arthur Ross and his son started a new life. They didn't return to the city but stayed in the fishing town and opened a small shop. Arthur, who had lived with guilt for years, found peace beside his son. He dedicated the rest of his life to him. Eric, for his part, completed his studies through entrance exams and learned the trade of boat repair, becoming a competent technician. He often called me, and his voice was no longer shy but full of joy and gratitude. He talked to me about his work, his new friends, his plans for the future. Sometimes he sent me fresh seafood he had caught himself for my daughter and me. Seeing him reclaim his life filled my heart with warmth. At least in this tragedy, one innocent person had found happiness. I sat in my office and looked through the case file again. The names, the faces, the destinies, intertwined like in a tragic novel. Karma. People say it's a supernatural punishment, the invisible hand of fate, but I see it differently. Karma isn't something that falls from the sky. It is the inevitable result of the choices and actions each human being sows. Jason, Mrs. Elizabeth, and their friends chose the path of lies, greed, and cruelty. And the end they received was ruin, loneliness, and suffering. It wasn't punishment, it was justice. All the resentment was now completely resolved, not by forgiveness, but by justice. The past was left behind, and the door to the future opened wide before me. I knew that from now on my life would only be filled with chapters of peace and hope. When the last aftershocks of the earthquake of my life passed, the ground beneath my feet stopped shaking. In its place, I felt a solidity and calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. The sky after the storm is always clearer and higher, and my dawn, my true dawn, had finally arrived. Not only bright but also warm, with the heat of renaissance and hope. I didn't gloat in victory, nor did I let the pleasure of revenge stain my soul. Instead, I chose to move forward, to build a new future with my own hands, a life in which I was no longer a victim or a judge, but a creator of happiness for myself and those around me. A few months after the trial verdict, I welcomed a little angel into my life. My daughter Aria was born surrounded by my love and my godmothers. The first time I held her in my arms, feeling that small warm life move in my lap, it was as if all the pain and wounds of the past had healed. She had the same dark eyes, but the high forehead and radiant smile of her maternal grandmother, whom she never met. Looking at her, I knew I had won the most precious treasure in the world. A reason to live, to fight, to be a better person. She wasn't just my daughter. She was a symbol of a new beginning, a tenacious life force springing from the ashes of destruction. I didn't go back to the old company stained with betrayal and painful memories. I sold it along with the Greenwich mansion. I wanted to break completely with the past, leave behind everything that belonged to Jason Sterling and his family. With the divorce settlement and my own assets, I could have lived a life of luxury without worries. But I didn't. The lesson from my mother and my own experiences taught me that money can be a useful tool, but it can never buy peace of heart. Instead of pursuing material wealth, I decided to seek something more valuable, a purpose. I used a considerable part of my assets to create the Rebirth Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal and psychological counseling to women victims of domestic violence and fraudulent marriages. I wanted to use my own story and my painful experiences to light a flame of help for other women, to let them know they aren't alone, that they have the right to be protected, and that they have the strength to get up and rebuild their lives. My godmother, Carol, became the foundation's advisor. Her wisdom, experience, and contacts helped Rebirth establish itself quickly and have a great social impact. We organized seminars, legal consultations, and created a safe shelter for women who needed an emergency place. Every case helped. Every smile recovered after tears brought me infinite joy and peace. I transformed my own pain into a force for the community, and that was the best way to heal myself. Parallel to the foundation, I started my own business, a business without the shadow of any man. I didn't choose the tumultuous path of big business again. Instead, I returned to a quiet passion I had harbored since college: art. I opened a small gallery called Aria, not only to exhibit the works of talented young painters but also as a place to give free art classes to children from disadvantaged backgrounds. I wanted to sow seeds of beauty and creativity in their souls so that art could heal wounds and give wings to dreams. My life now was busy but very peaceful. In the mornings I played with my daughter, watching her explore the world with her clear eyes. During the day I went to the gallery and immersed myself in the world of colors and creative ideas. In the evenings I worked at the foundation reading files, listening to stories, and looking for solutions with the team. Sometimes Carol dropped by with delicious food and valuable advice. We sat together, 3 generations of women sharing stories and laughter. My home was no longer a cold mansion, but a true refuge full of love and laughter. One weekend afternoon, while I was painting clumsily with Aria in the garden, Eric, Jason's cousin, came to visit us. He was no longer the shy young man from the country. After 2 years of study with my help and Carol's, he had graduated with honors in engineering and now worked as a competent mechanical engineer at a large shipbuilding company. He brought Aria a wooden boat model he had made himself. "Thank you, Emily," he said with a sincere voice. "If it weren't for you, I never would have left that fishing town. You gave me a new life." "Don't say that," I smiled. "It was thanks to your own effort. I'm very proud of you." Seeing the strong and good young man in front of me, my heart felt truly warm. The whirlwind of sins of the Sterling family hadn't stained his pure soul. He was proof that even in the darkest environment, kindness and will can sprout and grow. Life passed like that, in peace. I didn't think much about the past anymore. It had become a page in an old book, a lesson stored away. I no longer hated Jason or Mrs. Elizabeth. I only felt pity for those lives that had self-destructed out of greed. I learned to forgive, not for them, but for myself, not to carry the weight of hatred anymore, so my soul would be at peace and free. One day, looking through old photos of my mother, I found one where she appeared young next to an unknown man. They smiled very happily, and the way they looked at each other was full of affection. Behind the photo, a handwritten note said, "Memory of Martha's Vineyard, 1990. Suddenly I realized I knew almost nothing about my mother's life before she met my father. I asked Carol with the photo in my hand. She looked at it, and her eyes became nostalgic. "That was your mother's first love," she told me. "A poor painter, but very talented. They loved each other deeply, but had to separate because of family opposition and the difference in status." Carol's story surprised me. It turns out my mother also had a past, a bittersweet love story. Suddenly I understood that even the strongest women have their own hidden corners and wounds in their hearts. Love doesn't always have a happy ending, but what matters is how we face it, how we get up after the fall, and continue living a meaningful life. I didn't try to look for the man in the photo. I respected my mother's past. Instead, I decided to take a trip. I took Aria and Carol to that island of love and memories, Martha's Vineyard. We walked along the beach, watched the dune grass sway in the wind, and visited a small gallery on a secluded hill. In the quiet space, among the colorful landscapes, I felt a strange connection with my late mother. It was as if I could see that young woman full of love and hope, walking these same streets. That night we sat in a small cafe, contemplating the lights of the town shining like a galaxy. Arya slept soundly in my arms. Carol said softly, "Seeing you now makes me think of your mother. She would be very proud of you." I smiled with satisfaction. Yes, I think Mom would be proud too. I didn't let life's tragedy destroy me. I rose stronger and lived a brighter life than she could have hoped for. I no longer seek a quiet refuge in another man. I have created that refuge for myself. It is not a castle or a business empire. It is the freedom of the soul, the joy of work, the laughter of my daughter, and the unconditional love of my loved ones. My new dawn is not a destination, it is the journey itself.